Every 4 minutes, one person is diagnosed with a blood cancer. Every year, more than 12,000 patients in the U.S. are diagnosed with a life-threatening disease for which a blood or bone marrow transplant may be their best hope of a cure. Life-saving bone marrow transplantation brings that hope. BMT transplants are among the greatest success stories in the fight against cancer and other blood or marrow disorders, with success rates as high as 90% in some cases.
The whole idea behind this field is that in conditions in which the immune system has become the problem, it's become a cancer, leukemias, lymphomas, multiple myeloma, the cells can be replaced, the diseased tissue can be replaced or transplanted from another individual or from one's own self, if the cells can be properly cleaned, to cure the individual of these conditions.
Established in 1980, Scripps Blood and Marrow Transplant Center was the first BMT program in San Diego, California, and one of the first in the nation to administer life-saving stem cell transplantation. Today, the center is well recognized for its expertise and innovation, facilitating bone marrow and blood stem cell transplants for people across the country.
We provide compassionate level care and personalized care for all of our transplant patients. And we have resources and cutting-edge research to do transplants from blood and marrow and from umbilical cord blood. This is a relatively young field. It began in the 1960s and 70s in Seattle with Dr. Don Thomas. He subsequently got a Nobel Prize for this, using brothers and sisters as donors for individuals with acute leukemias. Subsequently, it's evolved. Now we have unrelated donors, and in fact we have millions of potential unrelated donors around the world who can donate blood or marrow stem cells for individuals with conditions like leukemias or similar who need to have a life-saving transplant.
So not everyone finds their perfect match. 70% of the patients that are searching are not able to find a match from their family. So they're looking to be the match, and we're the world's largest registry. And what we're doing is adding potential donors to the database so that when patients' physicians, such as Scripps, are searching for a potential match, they're able to have a greater pool of donors to pull from.
The other major advance, I think, has been the development of techniques which allow us to push the age limit. It wasn't very many years ago, but you had to be really under 50 years old to have a transplant. Now we can push that up into the early 70s.
Noelle Allenmeyer, a transplant recipient and cancer survivor, knows firsthand the value of being able to get this life-saving treatment through the generosity of a donor and the skills of a compassionate transplant team.
I was first diagnosed in an emergency room. They told me that I was severely anemic and that I probably had leukemia.
Noel's situation was that his disease, which had started out as a chronic disease and often an easily treatable one called chronic myelogenous leukemia, had changed into a very aggressive disease we call acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And when this change occurs, the chances of survival using conventional techniques is very, very low. It's less than 5%.
It came on so fast. I mean, one day I was playing golf and feeling great, and the next day I was sitting down at every other hole I was sitting on the bench.
Because Noel didn't have a brother or sister who matched him, we looked to the registry.
Well, first they told me when they diagnosed me that it would be 6 to 9 months before they could find a donor because I had no siblings. And within a month, they said, we have 4. 2 of them are almost perfect.
These 2 people had joined the registry. It could have been several years ago, could have been a few months back, but their HLA typing is in our database, and these 2 people were shown to have the amount of genetic markers that Noel's physician felt would be best suited for his match.
What a match means is that the genetics, the immune system genetics of the 2 individuals are very, very close. Essentially, you're finding a long, long distant cousin, 50 generations removed, essentially is what is happening. And our immune genetics are determined by our parentage and our ethnicity to some degree. And so when we find a match, we're finding someone else who has immune genetics which are so close that the immune systems will be compatible with each other. If the immune systems aren't compatible, a condition called graft versus host disease can occur, wherein the graft, that is the cells from the donor, can attack the body of the recipient, sometimes very seriously. Or the recipient's immune system can fight off the cells from the donor, and that's a loss of the graft. Neither case is acceptable. So we have to have a very, very tight level of match, and genomics now has allowed us to do that.
When I heard bone marrow transplant, and I don't know what the difference is between a bone marrow transplant and a stem cell transplant, except that they don't pull bone marrow out of you and put new in. They give you a bag of blood that's been treated somehow, and that's all it is. I laid there, I had this thing in my chest that was called a grochon. It's a port with two hoses. One of them is for giving blood and one of them is for taking chemo or blood. And all they did was hook the bag up to my port, and it was done in an hour.
Bone marrow is extracted from the back of the donor's pelvic bone under general anesthesia, a painless procedure with minimal discomfort afterwards. Stem cells can also be obtained through a method called peripheral blood stem cell donation. The donor takes a medication for 4 days which stimulates the stem cells to release into the blood from the bone marrow. The blood is then donated, and the stem cells are extracted and shipped for transplant to the recipient.
Generally speaking, it's better if patients have a transplant earlier in their disease state rather than later. The outcomes are actually much, much better. And the cure rate's about twice as high in acute leukemia, for instance, if patients are transplanted earlier in their disease rather than waiting. So we try to encourage patients to be referred in while they're still early in their disease, when we can find a donor and get them to their transplant. Good morning, Noel. How are you doing? There have been a lot of advances once a person has a transplant to get them back to life and back to the way they were before. And that's here at Scripps, that's a key driver for us, is to get them back functioning as fast as we can in their family life, their hobbies, and eventually their vocation.
I never had a bad experience. It was perfect. They get 100% gold stars on everything. I feel better now than I did before. It's phenomenal what these people do. And how do they know to do that? Because they're brilliant.